Hey everybody, my name is Romania Black, and on this episode of the Soapbox, I am reviewing the manga series Given. And let me tell you, I have spent all month rereading this series and dreading this video. Why? Because Given's amazing, and covering it all in one video is never going to be enough. It's kind of like Attack on Titan, in that you can talk about Given for hours and hours and hours, and it's never going to be enough. There's always going to be new symbolic elements, new themes, new things come up with each chapter. It's going to be something new being revealed that's going to tie back into the story and change everything, and so it never feels like enough. So going into this video, I was actually dreading it because I feel like whatever I say and whatever I talk about isn't going to be enough. But luckily, y'all have the comment section down below where you can keep talking and have the conversation. We can keep it going. We can talk more about the symbolism, everything else. But Given is an amazing series. If you have not seen my reactions, you can go to my playlist on YouTube, or if you're on Patreon, you can look up my Given videos. I've reacted to the anime series, all 11 episodes. I've reacted to the movie that came out last year, and I'm going to react to the OVA that's going to come out this year. And I've also done a 10 under 10 episode about the live action series. It's also on the 10 under 10 playlist on my YouTube channel and on Patreon as well. So I am kind of spoiled, if I'm being honest. I made a bunch of notes here to talk about this soapbox. I'm actually structuring this more like I'm also watching Attack on Titan, the anime right now. And at the end of each Attack on Titan season, I do a recap video. And so for this soapbox, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Given is such a detailed and in-depth series that just going over the plot is not enough. So I've kind of structured this video more like the recap videos that I do like for Attack on Titan, because I want to talk more about the structure and the themes and the symbolism of the series as a whole and what I like best about it, rather than just doing a play-by-play with the plot, which we'll talk about the plot, but that's not going to be the only thing we talk about. So I am very spoiled and very lucky because I came across Given right when I started this channel. I had started watching Toilet Bound Hanako-kun, and I was going to watch another series with it. And a fellow patron, Wushin Suibian, and some other patrons said that I should watch Given. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, I'll do that. It was my first entry into a BL series. It's like, what a series to fall into. And it's kind of, I won't say it's ruined me for other BL series, but it's definitely spoiled me, because it and Twittering Birds Never Fly are probably my two favorite BL series right now. And they're just absolutely wonderful. And what I love about Given is that it's actually become quite a mainstream series. Whenever you see Barnes & Noble advertisements, whenever you see bookstore advertisements and they have manga series, you definitely see Given as one of the options among the other series, among all the shonen and popular titles. And I think that's wonderful, because a series like Given, that's a BL series that's dealing in LGBTQ romance and issues, is something that you don't normally see as mainstream, unfortunately. And so seeing this title get the recognition that it deserves is really, really important. And I really like it for that. And so I'm glad that it's become accessible, and it's kind of reshaping the way that we're doing boys love narratives, because a lot of time when people think of boys love, they think of yaoi. They think of, oh, it's just smut and spiciness, which nothing wrong with that. I've read my fair share. But I like Given in that it's very different from other boys love series, in that it doesn't focus just on that. It's actually, there's a lot more to it. And there's really not a lot of smuttiness in Given. There's some spiciness, but in comparison to other boys love series I've read and watched, there's really not that much. I mean, there's some kissing that with Akihiko and Haruki, that there's other things. But with our main characters, aside from that, until we get to like the later chapters, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But in the anime itself and in the earlier manga volumes, there's really not that much. It's more along the lines of developing a relationship. And I like that, because it's giving the audience characters and relationships that develop and grow naturally. And yes, they get to that point, but it's not just in your face like, oh, we didn't just hook up at a bar one night and now here's the rest of the story. No, it's much different. It starts out in a much more pure sense and innocent sense, and kind of just develops from there, at least for Mafiyu and Uenoyama. So actually, before I even read Given, I had already experienced this author's art style and their work. Natsuki Kizu has a pen name of Gusari, and I had been a haiku fan before I even stumbled across Given. And I had been reading Oizumi and Oikawa Doujinshi that was under Kizu's pen name Gusari for like years. I'd been reading that and I was like, oh, this is the same artist? Really? She actually is getting her work published? Awesome. And so I had actually come across her artwork before. And if you've ever read those Iwa Oi Doujinshi, you can definitely tell her art style from like a mile away, and you instantly know it when you read Given. You're like, oh, okay. And there's been a lot of people point out that Mafuyu and Uenoyama are kind of prototype developed from Hinata and Kageyama. You can see that in their designs, but that's pretty much where the similarities end. Other than that, they're their very own characters, which is great. But I have my notes pulled up here, and so what we're going to be talking about in this soapbox video is recapping the plot, talking about expectations and surprises with the series, mainly with about themes and symbolism, and then going with ranking the volumes. Oh, buddy. And then character tiers, favorite ships, things like that. And then I want to talk about what I'm going to be looking at later this winter, and then about season 2, because a lot of people speculate, are we going to get season 2 with Given? I think that we will, and we'll talk more about that. But I want to recap the plot of each volume. If you've never read Given before, just spoiler warnings. There's going to be spoilers for Given, especially where the manga is currently. There's going to be spoilers, so just proceed with caution. If I start talking about something that you feel is in spoiler territory, just tune me out, because we are going to talk about spoilers in this. But if you have not collected all the volumes of the manga, I highly recommend reading the manga. The manga includes character charts, it includes lots of little bonus strips. The anime does a good job of incorporating a lot of those bonus strips, but there's lots of stuff that's left out. There's information about the characters themselves, about the instruments that they play. The manga is definitely worth it. And right now there's only 6 volumes in the English translation. So if you can find them, they're a little bit harder to find in print, but they're definitely available digitally. But if you can get your hands on them, I highly encourage it. And I'm trying to, now that I have Patreon and people are supporting me through Patreon, I'm trying to basically give support to the original artists and authors and mangaka. So if I review a series and I end up reading the manga, I try to read the official copies so that I'm giving back to those creators that I'm, creating reactions for. But with that being said, volume 1, I've got the volumes in my lap here. I've got my 6 that I've gotten so far, and then I've pre-ordered volume 7, the Japanese version. It's going to come with the OVA. So volume 1, if you don't have it, volume 1 basically of the anime, it covers, and I'll show you all a picture of it. I love it. And we're going to talk about the cover here a little bit later. Wushin on Patreon and I have had a somewhat discussion about this. But volume 1 covers episodes basically 1 through 6 of the anime, which it covers a lot in this short amount of time, the short amount of volume there. But it covers episodes 1 through 6. There's part of episode 5 that was rearranged that'll be in volume 2. But for the most part, it covers episodes 1 through 6, introducing Mafuyu, Uenoyama, Haruki, Akihiko, introducing the classmates, introducing Yuki, the entire situation, and the basic setup of the story. So volume 1, pretty standard. Volume 2 is probably one of my favorite volumes, and it covers part of episode 5. There's a part where Ugetsu shows up, and it's in this volume instead of volume 1, but it covers episodes 7 through 9 mainly, and mainly gets to the concert, which is the climax of the anime. Volume 2 is really, really good. And then the series, volume 3 is the smallest volume. If you look at volume 1 compared to volume 3, if you look at that, it's a bit smaller. Volume 3 is the smallest volume of all. It's also it's not the angstiest volume, that's volume 4, but volume 3 is a transitional volume, so it covers the rest of the anime, and then it begins the first part of the movie. So if you get to Ugetsu's violin solo from the movie, that's in this, and then the very ending episodes 10 and 11 of the anime are in volume 3, which I love episodes 10 and 11, and so I like volume 3 a lot. Volume 4 is the second smallest, and it's the angstiest volume so far. Volume 4 is hard, as you can see, and of course they make blue the color. If you look at the colors, you probably noticed, but it's a rainbow. It's a rainbow, and so fitting for Given. But volume 4, it covers the most tense moments of the series. So the whole issue of the toxic relationship between Ugetsu and Akihiko. It covers when Akihiko is at his lowest point, when him and Haruki have their encounter and he basically assaults Haruki. And it also covers some angsty moments between Mafuyu and Uenoyama, which I'm not going to spoil because I am going to react to the OVA, but those moments that were not included in the movie are going to be included in the OVA coming out between Mafuyu and Uenoyama. So those are in volume 4 if you need it. And then volume 5 is the big one. This is the big sucker. This is most of the movie. Most of the movie is covered in volume 5. If you've watched the movie, spoilers if you've not watched the given movie, but just skip ahead like 30 seconds. But volume 5 starts when Haruki cuts his hair. And from then on, it basically covers the rest of the movie and includes bits and pieces that I'm assuming are going to be in the OVA. So volume 5 is great. It includes the confession scene between Akihiko and Haruki, which is one of my favorites in the whole series. It covers all of that for the movie. So basically the entire anime and movie is covered in volumes 1 through 5. So if you've watched the anime and you've watched the movie, you should get volumes 1 through 5. That'll cover everything. So the new material that has not been covered in either the OVA that's coming out or in the movie or the anime series is where volume 6 comes in. And that is a volume that I just got through pre-order a few weeks ago. And I love it. So we'll talk about this when we get to season 2. But basically, volume 6 covers a lot of different things. It covers Uenoyama's sister gets a new boyfriend after her dramatic breakup with Akihiko. She actually starts dating Taka-chan, which I'm all for. I'm like, okay, I was originally like Taka-chan. I was like, are you going to pursue Haruki? Nah, he's with Yayoi. And I'm like, yes, please. It's actually great. But Uenoyama's sister kind of warns Uenoyama that he is potentially going to be hurt by his relationship with Mafiu. She doesn't understand Uenoyama's relationship with another man. She confronts Haruki about it and admits that she wants to understand, but she doesn't know how to communicate or ask the right questions. And so Haruki is kind of like, well, okay, and starts to develop a friendship with her, because for most of the series through volumes 1 through 5 he had kind of been jealous of her and her relationship with Akihiko. But as this new volume starts, he realizes that, okay, she's got a boyfriend now, she's not with Akihiko anymore, we can kind of develop a more mutual relationship with one another. And he wants to help her understand too, so that she can communicate with her brother. But beyond that, as the cover suggests, we get more into Hiragi. And Hiragi and I share a birthday. I love Hiragi. Not only are we birthday buddies, we share a birthday on May 8th, but Hiragi is just, he's great. He's such a diva, such a princess, but he's also a brat. He's such a cat, and I love him. So him and Uenoyama have this like frenemies relationship where they get along, but they don't get along. And in this volume, they ask Uenoyama to be a rhythm guitar player in their band for their debut, because since Yuki has passed, it's just been Shizu and Hiragi, and they had a backup guitarist, but he had to leave for circumstances. So Uenoyama agrees to be their guitarist to sub in, to play rhythm guitar with them. But as it turns out, Hiragi admits that ever since they started the band, kept the band going after Yuki's death, they've not played any of Yuki's music. It's all been music that Hiragi has written. And so there's a song that Yuki never got to finish that we are led to be assuming is one he was writing for Mafiu. And Hiragi wants Uenoyama to help finish it and then perform it at the concert that they're going to debut at. And so Uenoyama agrees, and it's the craziest thing. He's working on basically his boyfriend's ex's song that's a love letter to him. So lots of complicated things with that. And his sister kind of warns him, like, isn't that kind of heavy? You're continuing and finishing the song of your boyfriend's dead boyfriend. Isn't that weird? And Uenoyama's like, I really want to do this. And he kind of becomes drawn into this. Meanwhile, Mafiu believes that he's being left behind, much like he was when Yuki was in the band with Hiragi and Shizusumi. And so there's lots of parallels to how Mafiu's feeling. He's starting to question their relationship. It's been stagnant. It's not moving forward. So throughout the volume, Mafiu's kind of starting to feel down on himself. And so he runs into Shizusumi, and Shizusumi has kind of a spotlight in this volume where he confronts Mafiu about him and Uenoyama and kind of confesses that for a while he didn't want to convince, because we find out that Shizu is in love with Hiragi. Hiragi is in love with Shizu, surprising no one, right? But it starts to set up their whole issue of them trying to confess to one another. And Shizu confesses to Mafiu that he does love Hiragi. And when Mafiu's like, well, why won't you just say anything to him and put it out there in the open? Because clearly Hiragi likes you too. Shizu says that he was worried that Hiragi was actually in love with Yuki before. And it's revealed that Yuki was kind of the center of their band. Everyone kind of revolved around Yuki. He had this dominant, brooding personality, and everybody kind of, rotated around him. And then once he left the picture and was no longer there, the band kind of fell apart. Nobody knew what to do. So Shizu basically says he would do anything to stay with Hiragi, and he would, give up his life to stay with Hiragi, basically. He's that in love with him. And Mafio's kind of amazed by that. But Shizu warns Mafio, he's like, if you're not going to commit to the band, if you're not going to commit to Uenoyama, you need to cut him off and leave. Because otherwise it's just going to end in heartbreak. And that's at that point, Mafio's like, well, crap. And so he feels like he's being left behind. And at the end of the volume, he goes and asks Akihiko for advice. And that's where volume 6 ends. It's great. The manga is going into a lot of different places. I'm recording this on November 28th. So in a couple of days, actually, the newest chapter is going to be coming out. And so on the Discord, I'm going to be talking about that, which is exciting. But yeah, I love the manga. I love where it's headed. And we'll talk more about this kind of plot development once we get to talking about season 2. But that's basically the plot of the series. And so expectations going into Given, I didn't know what to expect because I'd never experienced a boys love anime before. And so I'd read boys love manga doujinshi before. Like I'd read Iwohoi fanfiction doujinshi. I'd read fanfiction for other series where it was, boys love, but I'd never actually watched a BL anime that was explicitly that genre. And Given spoils me because it's such a good story. The characters are so rich and likable and relatable, and the story is so in-depth, and it delves into relationships and grief and so many different thematic elements. My favorites that I'm going to talk about in this video. But I didn't know what to expect. And it was a lot more realistic than I expected. Because, when you think of anime and it's a band, you're like, oh, it's going to be like super colorful. And there is humor. This series is very funny. But the humor is not like cartoony or too over the top. Like it's pretty grounded for the most part, and the series is a lot more realistic than I was expecting, which I liked. And also it wasn't explicitly like yaoi. It was not like I was expecting like guys checking their shirts and it being like free and lots of fan service. No, there is fan service, but it's not what you expect. So like I said, I'm very spoiled because Given and Twittering Birds are probably my 2 favorite series. And Twittering Birds is a whole different story than this. But I'm very spoiled because they're both probably some of the better BL stories out there in terms of having a good plot and characters and a story that's engaging and makes you want to read more. So there's that. As far as surprises with the series goes, I mentioned a few of them. Every time I watch the anime, the moment when Ugetsu pops up and you find out that he's been living with Akihiko, it still surprises me each and every time. I absolutely love it. I love how relationships are handled in this series, and that was a surprise that we have so many couples and so many couples that are canon, right? Because normally in any anime series you watch, you kind of have your couples picked out. Like I'm watching Ace of the Diamond right now, and I can ship Sawamura and Miyuki all day long, but are they ever going to be a canon couple? Probably not, unless, probably not explicitly. But in this, yeah, explicit couples, right? Haruki and Akihiko are a couple. In characters in the story acknowledge that they're a couple, which is something I wasn't expecting to see in a series being canon, and I really, really love it. Other than that, the Mafio being a secret troll, especially around Hiragi and Uenoyama, especially around Hiragi. Mafio is presented as being such a cinnamon bun and so innocent and pure, but he's represented by a Pomeranian in the story. Like he has Furball, that's his Pomeranian. The English translation translates it to Furball as his name. But he's mischievous. Mafio is a troll, and especially around Hiragi, he does lots of little jabs at him that are kind of like secret jabs. And I love that. And then, of course, there's the emotional roller coaster that Kizu takes us on, where we have these characters and their relationships and the highs and lows and the dips and the twists and turns. And on Twitter, there's been a fellow Twitter Given enthusiast that posts the spoilers each month for the new chapter, and it's just like a big discussion all night where everybody like freaks out and has theories and are just waiting, anticipating the spoilers. It's good stuff. It's a lot of good stuff. Honestly, the themes of grief that are talked about in this series, I just finished watching the anime Violet Evergarden, and I kept thinking while watching Violet Evergarden, I'm like, a lot of these themes about grief and acceptance and characters dying and dealing with the consequences of their death and how they've influenced people, it reminded me a lot of Violet Evergarden. So if you've not read this manga or watched Given and you're a fan of Violet Evergarden, you'll like this series because it will take you on an emotional roller coaster just like that series does. So it's very, very, very touching but also very well written. And Kizu does a good job of getting you attached to these characters so that when things happen to them, you do feel like they're not only warranted, but you feel for those characters and you want to root for them. You want things to go well between them. And we'll talk about the themes as well in more detail coming up here in just a second. But yeah, so some of the big themes with Given. We'll talk about themes and symbolism. I've got several written up here in my notes, but the main theme is about relationships and the many forms of them. Because in so many stories and in so many series, especially ones that aren't strictly romance series, romance is dealt with in a very like minimalist or very pragmatic, like basic way. Like, oh, we're a couple, we're going on dates, we're gonna make out, and that's our relationship, right? We're gonna hold hands and do this. But Kizu takes with Given the concept of relationship and just completely like unravels the concept of a relationship in all of its many threads and all of its many forms and all the many angles that it can take, and just completely gives us characters that are all in different relationships, and they're all in relationships that each reader can relate to in some way or another. Like there's probably a couple in Given that you can relate to more than someone else, but there's going to be a couple or a character that you relate to by and by. So you have Mafiu, and a lot of times Kizu likes to parallel characters and parallel relationships. So you have Mafiu, who is our main character. You have him and his relationship with his dead boyfriend Yuki, and then you have his new relationship with Wainayama. And a lot of the series is paralleling those two relationships and showing how different they are and how different they make Mafiu in the process. When Mafiu is in a relationship with Yuki, Mafiu has a more submissive and quiet demeanor and kind of lets Yuki take the reins. And then in his new relationship with Wainayama is the virgin in the relationship. So the character that's normally you would consider as the dominant character, Wainayama, is the one who's the virgin and the inexperienced one and doesn't know what to do. And so Mafiu kind of morphs into a more dominant personality in that relationship and kind of has more initiative. And I hope that Kizu develops their relationship more to where Mafiu is more dominant, because I think that's really cool that Mafiu could be the one to show Wainayama, how can this relationship progress, because this is really Wainayama's first big relationship. So there's that. And Mafiu is, even though he's quiet, and you can kind of see throughout the manga that he uses a lot of nonverbal communication. He's clingy and touchy, and he uses a lot of gestures and things to get across the message he's trying to do without having to say words. Like for a main character, he's very, very minimalist in terms of communication, which is fine, right? I like that we have a lot of main characters in the story that are very different and they're not what you expect, right? So the roles of partners in relationships, another couple that gets paralleled is with Akihiko. You have Akihiko in his relationship with Haruki, and then his relationship with Ugetsu, which are when we talk about symbolism, we'll get more into that. But the way that each of them affect Akihiko, much like Yuki and Wainayama affect Mafiu. So there's lots of parallels there. You have Mafiu and Wainayama that are your high school pairing, along with Hiragi and Shizusumi, and now we're getting in the manga with Iteya and Ueki. That seems to be where Kizu is taking it. But you have these high school pairings, and then you have your more adult pairings. So you have Wainayama's sister and Taki-chan, and you have Haruki and Akihiko, and you have Ugetsu. So you have kind of your high school couples and then your older college couples to kind of compare and contrast with one another and show the different types of relationships and their maturity that can take place within them. So, and then the parallels with the characters and the lack of an antagonist. There's not really an antagonist in Given, which you would think on saying that, you would think, oh, well, if there's no antagonist, then where's the conflict? But the conflict is with all the characters, and true to real life, it's just within the characters and sometimes themselves, sometimes the situations surrounding them, but there's not really a bad guy. I think a lot of people like to make Ugetsu a villain or an antagonist, and in some respects, he is the conflict. He is mainly Akihiko's antagonist, technically, throughout most of the movie and in the manga, but at the end of the day, Ugetsu is just a person that is struggling with a faded love that he doesn't hold for Akihiko anymore, but he can't move on. He's afraid to move on and let go completely. And so you have that toxicity that forms, and really the toxicity between them becomes the antagonist, not necessarily either one of them. Because both Ugetsu and Akihiko do bad things to each other, and they egg on that toxicity, even when they realize that it's bad for each other. So I like that Kizu is suggesting, very true to real life, that there's really no bad guy. It's just people with different perspectives, and relationships either work or they don't work, much like is in real life. So I appreciate that a lot. We have lots of parallels between characters, and I was talking about Ugetsu earlier. Mafiu and Ugetsu have lots of parallels. In this story, especially when you get down to volumes like 3 and 4, Mafiu and Ugetsu, both very introverted characters that have lots of similarities between one another. Mafiu kind of wanting to go off on his own to think up the song lyrics and kind of wanting to do his own thing and be by himself because he doesn't really know how to laugh, cry, or communicate with people. Ugetsu being a soloist and not really wanting to be tied down to someone because he doesn't want them to stifle his own creative expression. So there's a lot. They're both kind of prodigies, Mafiu and Ugetsu are. So there's lots of parallels between those two characters. You have Haruki paralleling Ueniyama in a sense. Haruki and Ueniyama kind of fall hard and fast in love with the people that they care about, and so they have to deal with the consequences of falling hard and fast. You have Akihiko paralleling with Mafiu and how they deal with relationships. Shizasumi, he confronts both Mafiu and Ueniyama in the manga and proves that you can't, even though I'm saying there's all these parallels, Shizu kind of shows Mafiu and Ueniyama that you can't quite parallel everything. Because in the manga right now, and this is past volume 6, I'm assuming this is going to be in volume 7 or volume 8, but Shizu confronts Ueniyama and is like, I worship Haragi, and I would do anything for him. But you aren't like that with Mafiu. You don't worship Mafiu. So your relationship and our relationship cannot be the same thing, and you should stop equating us the same way. And it's like, ugh! And so Ueniyama, at this later part of the manga, like where the manga is now, one of the things Ueniyama is dealing with is coming to grips with the fact that his relationship with Mafiu can't be like these other characters in their relationships. They're not cookie cutter relationships. They're all different. They all have their own sets of problems and challenges, but they all have their own rewards and happiness that they bring that's different than if he was in a relationship with someone else. So Ueniyama is trying to navigate through that in the manga right now and figuring out, like, how am I going to fight for my relationship with Mafiu? Am I going to fight for it, and what am I going to do? And this is from Twitter that just came out today, which was a picture of Ueniyama with a bloody nose that Kizu released for one of the upcoming calendar pictures, and it shows him like wiping the blood away, and everybody's like, what's it symbolic of? And a lot of people I agree with are saying it's a metaphor for Ueniyama fighting for his relationship with Mafiu and willing to shed blood for it. I'm like, awesome, cool. Which we'll get to symbolism here in a little bit. But yeah, and then we have characters like Taya, who's the basketball boy in the manga, one of Ueniyama's basketball friends. He's very similar to Mafiu in the manga. They do a lot of the same gestures, like they like to rub their heads on people's shoulders and do lots of different like innocent little gestures that are very, very similar to each other. And I would argue Ueki and Shizu are paralleled as well. They're more serious, stoic characters. And it seems like, again, a few days ago on Twitter, Kizu showed a picture of Ataya, and it's hinted that maybe the manga is going to start getting into Ataya and Ueki's relationship. Right now, Ueniyama and Mafiu are going through some angsty times in the current manga where it's at right now. And so a lot of people are speculating whether or not Ueniyama is... He's seen how Haragi and Shizu's relationship is. He's seen how Haruki and Akihiko's relationship is. And he's realized that him and Mafiu are not really like either of those. So I think what Kizu is going to do is show us Ataya and Ueki's relationship and let Mafiu or Ueniyama see that and realize, well, we're not like that either. And then maybe they'll talk it out and realize, come to grips with what their relationship actually is. In Volume 6, they're also prepping for a debut, and that's going to lead into, I think, the events of Volume 7 and Volume 8. And I think I'm waiting for Ueniyama to play the song that was Yuki's song with Haragi's band, and I want Mafiu to hear it. And I think that's going to be a catalyst for them having a sincere, deep conversation about, okay, what was Yuki to Mafiu? Because all Ueniyama really knows is that Mafiu loved him, but they've not really gotten the chance to sit down and have a full-blown conversation about Yuki and what he meant to Mafiu. And I think that if they're going to move forward in their relationship, they need to sit down and do that. And I think after the concert, it's going to happen, because so far in this series, we talk about symbolism here in a moment, but music is a big metaphor for love. And when characters like pour their heart out through song, it's a way for them to communicate to others that love. And I think when Ueniyama sings that song that Yuki wrote, or Hiragi sings it, and Ueniyama's playing on it, Mafiu is going to kind of get the gist of what's going on. So lots of stuff happening, lots of stuff, but I'm already talking for like 30 minutes. We need to keep going. So other things that are paralleled, not only, or not paralleled, but also other themes that are touched upon are how grief is handled. That's a big thing in this series, is dealing with grief. And I really like that about this series, because the series opens up with Mafiu dealing with the fact that Yuki's committed suicide. And we come to find out as the series goes on that Mafiu blames himself for that suicide because of the argument him and Yuki had right before it. And so this series deals mainly with Mafiu moving on through that relationship and through grief, but it also shows how other characters like Hiragi deal with grief. It shows how Haruki deals with grief after him and Akihiko have their big incident. It shows how Ugetsu deals with grief. Akihiko deals with grief. A lot of these characters are going through hard events in their lives during the course of this manga, and the series shows how each of them deals with that grief in a different way that can be effective or ineffective, depending on their character and the situation. But it's interesting because it's stuff that could happen to any of us, and the way that they deal with grief is very relatable, because I think all of us have been through situations like some of these characters, maybe not as extreme as Mafiu is dealing with, but if a friend has died, you might go through like what Hiragi is going through, or if you're dealing with like a breakup, or dealing with the fact of being kicked out of your home, like Akihiko goes through, or dealing with assault like Haruki does, and things like that, or Ugetsu, where you can't leave someone because that relationship's grown toxic, but you just have gotten addicted to them and you don't want to leave them. I think that there's different situations throughout the manga that many people can relate to in some form or another, and Kizu does a really good job of fleshing those issues out and letting the characters have deep, in-depth conversations with one another about them, which is interesting. And there's also, speaking with that, the idea of moving forward, that Mafiu, in other series you talk about when you move forward from a character but you still hold part of them with you. For Mafiu, it's him carrying Yuki's guitar and playing it. That's his connection to Yuki. And Ueniyama replacing and fixing the strings for him is kind of like Ueniyama's way of coming into that relationship and kind of allowing Mafiu to move forward while still keeping Yuki with him. And I think that's going to be part of their discussion, that you can't ever fully let go of someone. Even if you've ended a relationship and you've started a new one, those experiences you've had with that person in the past, they're not going to fully leave you. You may forget about some of them, and there's a whole big scene in volume 2 where Yuki tells Mafiu, he's like, you're going to eventually forget about me. And Mafiu's like, no, I'm not. And so a big part of this is the idea that, yeah, you may forget some things about that person, but not everything. There's going to be a part of them that sticks with you no matter what happens. And how do you move forward from that if it's something dramatic like Yuki's death? And the manga explores that. But then you also have issues like abuse between family and friends specifically. There's not really abuse from outsiders in the story. No one gets in a fight with like a mugger or something. It's really in the inner circle of these characters. You have Mafiu dealing with his abusive father at the beginning of the series, and it kind of culminates in volume 2. And then you go on and have Haruki dealing with, Akihiko assaults him, essentially. And I know that in the manga they label it as consensual, and it rides that line, but it's still something that shouldn't have happened, and Haruki has to deal with that, and so does Akihiko. You have Akihiko fighting with Ugetsu. That happens in this series, and it causes physical harm. And so there's dealings with abuse and how people can project their frustrations upon others during situations. Like Akihiko admits after what he did to Haruki, he's like, I was mad at Ugetsu and I was mad at myself and I felt awful about myself and I was just projecting it on you when that wasn't fair. So there's that. And that leads into the idea of second chances and how precious those second chances are. And for Akihiko and Ugetsu, there'd been way too many second chances, and it had gotten to the point where the relationship was just unhealthy and they had to move on. But with Haruki, what I like about this series, I would argue volume 4, it's controversial, and the movie's controversial in that scene too. But what I like about this series is that Haruki has the voice. Haruki has the decision in everything and has the power in the end of it. Haruki makes the decision of whether or not to let Akihiko stay, of whether or not to give Akihiko a second chance. and Haruki has the power in that moment as a victim to make decisions, and Akihiko respects them, which is good. And so I appreciate that, but I also appreciate the idea of just how precious that second chance is. Like, Akihiko takes it to heart. Like, I've been given a second chance. I'm not going to mess it up. And then there's the situation of Mafiu, who him and Ueniyama in this, he starts to get upset and actually communicates with Ueniyama. And I hope it's in the OVA that's coming out, that conversation where Ueniyama is afraid that he doesn't want to lose Ueniyama, but he also doesn't want to get in a fight with him because he's like, there may not be a second chance. Like, he's so traumatized from losing Yuki after their argument that he's afraid that if something goes wrong, there won't be a second chance at that relationship again. So it's a really, really good topic and a really good theme to be talked about in the series itself. But other themes that are talked about, there's two more before I get to symbolism. One being the difficulty of love and relationships. Nothing is easy in this whole series. If you can learn anything from Given, relationships are hard and they're layered and difficult. And what I love about this series that is focused on romance, love sometimes seems rather easy. Like, I've read a lot of BL series and boys love and just regular romance where it's like, well, we're in love, happily ever after. Guess we'll just have sex now and everything will be okay. It's like, no, things are much more complicated. And there's really not a lot of sex in Given. There's a little bit of sexy times to be had, especially past this volume. If you're reading the current manga chapters, we'll talk about that towards the end of this video. But yeah, relationships aren't easy. And this series doesn't shy away from the fact that, yeah, it's not just you make out and everything's great. No, there has to be communication. There has to be talks. And there has to be, evolution of the relationship. And sometimes it doesn't work out. And there's going to be bumpy times in the road. And nothing's going to be perfect. I honestly think that Kizu is saving. She's been going through Akihiko and Haruki's relationship, through Hiragi and Shizusumi. Now she's developing on Ateya. I think she's intentionally leaving Mafiu and Ueniyama for the end. She's having them go through angsty, bumpy times right now in the manga, but she's not going to give them any resolution to their relationship until the very end because they're the main couple. And I can respect her for that decision. And then the final thing about themes that I want to talk about is that love is love and the normalization of love. And that it's okay. One of my favorite parts is in, I think it's episode 5, where Ueniyama has the conversation with Akihiko and he's like, is it weird that I like a guy? And Akihiko says, no, it's not weird. And I love that. I love that a series just point blank talks about sexuality, comes out and just says it. And it's like, no, it's fine. Love is love. You love who you love. It's okay. Akihiko's bisexual. Haruki's bisexual. Like, they're characters that love other not just men, not just women. And it's totally normal. One of the things that I love in this volume, in volume 6 that comes out, is that there's a section, like a little bonus panel in here, where Haruki, we meet one of his sisters. And Haruki's older sister has like a little girl. And they're like just meeting up with him and they're like, oh, can we see pictures of your boyfriend? Oh my gosh, he's so handsome. Oh my God, he's hot. Like, look, mom. And like shows the parents and the parents are like, oh my God, you have a boyfriend. That's great. And everything's normalized. It's totally like, it's not a big deal. And I love that because so many forms of media or narratives, especially in Western culture, I feel like draw attention to it. Like, we have to point it out and be like, oh my gosh, did you know? And it's like, nah, it's normal. It's fine. We established in volume 1 that it's okay. And from then on, it's like not treated as a big thing. I mean, the one girl, Kasai, and her friends, like in volume 1, they kind of confront Ueniyama about it early on and are like, oh, did you know that Mafiu dated a guy? And that's the one time it's really focused on in a way that's kind of like, oh, but then after that, it's fine. So it's not really drawn up again as being a big deal in the rest of the series. So I appreciate that a lot. So let's talk about symbolism. So symbolism, there's so much with Given. And I feel like I'm not going to touch upon, I'm going to touch the tip of the iceberg in this. We're going to get into the tip of the iceberg of symbolism with the Given. I'm going to talk about my favorite symbolism moments. I'm sure in the comments down below, you all will add to this. When we have discussions on Discord or whatever, it's going to get added to it. There's just so much you can talk about. But Wushin on Discord and on Patreon, we were talking about this, and she brought up a really good point. And I've been looking at these covers, and I wanted to notice as well, because the covers for the English version are pretty similar to the Japanese version. They're a little bit bigger. That's just the print that the US uses because, you know, the bigger the better, right? But I wanted to make note that you'll notice these colored triangles. They are across the cover. They're on most of the covers, actually. And there could be some symbolic meaning to these triangles. If you've heard of The Night Before the Tri-Cornered Window, that's another BL mystery series. They focus on triangles a lot. But there's a lot of symbolism behind triangles. But what I'm focused on is their relationship to the cover. So in volume 1, we have the triangles are all along the top, right? They're all succinct together, our band's all together, and they're all there at the top. Then you compare it to volume 2. And you can see that the triangles are starting to fall down a little bit, right? They're falling down towards the middle. Our band's all together still, but the triangles are still together, but they're starting to fall, right? Then you compare volume 2 to volume 3. And in volume 3, the triangles have fallen even further. They're still together. Our 4 guys are still together, but the triangles are falling, right? They're starting to fall, right? Our band guys are together, but that's starting to happen. Then we have the angsty volume, volume 4. And you'll notice that our 4 guys are still together, but the triangles are starting to split up, right? The triangles are now behind the guys, and they're starting to split apart. They're starting to crumble, right? And then we get to volume 5, the triangles are breaking up. And at this point, and it's just Mafiu on the cover for here. Like, our 4 guys are on the cover for volume 4, but Mafiu is the only one on the cover for volume 5. And this is the end of the movie. So this is where Mafiu sings his second song, and he's talking about moving forward. But the triangles are all splitting up. And then for the cover volume 6, it's Ueniyama and Hiragi. And if you notice, the triangles are barely there. They're tiny little confetti pieces. The triangles are all but broken up, right? And then in volume 7, that's just coming out in Japan, the person on the cover of it is Shizu, and there's no triangles at all. So there's been a lot of speculation of what that means. Do the triangles represent the band Given? And is it showing that the band Given is kind of starting to break apart because Ueniyama's gone to be a sub-guitarist for Hiragi's band. Mafiu's kind of on his own and doesn't really know if he wants to sing anymore. Haruki and Akihiko are off doing their own thing. Like, there's not been a lot of band practices for Given at this point in the manga. So things are kind of breaking apart and seeming like they're just kind of starting to separate. And so I think that's really interesting. I'll be curious if we get a volume 8, what that cover is going to look like. If we're going to go back to, we've had Mafiu and then Hiragi and Ueniyama, and Shizu's in the cover of volume 7. So I'm wondering for volume 8, like, is Yuki going to be on the cover for volume 8? Or is it going to go back to like Akihiko and Haruki being on the cover for volume 8? I don't know. It would be cool if for volume 8, if Yuki was on the cover, because we've gotten Mafiu and Ueniyama, and then we've gotten 2 members of Hiragi's band. It would be cool if Yuki was on the cover for volume 8. That would be interesting, because at this current point in the manga, Yuki is kind of at the center of it. He's kind of symbolically the center of everything for Hiragi's band, and so it would be interesting. And Yuki's kind of that one last tether that Mafiu has, that if he's going to move forward in his relationship with Ueniyama, he needs to talk about Yuki. So that could be interesting. I'd be very curious. It'll just be a black cover with Yuki on the front. That would be horrible. Instead of all the bright rainbows, it's just black. You know, well, hopefully not. Maybe it'll be purple or something. We've already had purple though, so we'll see. But yeah, the triangles. And so then obviously the biggest symbolism in the story is just music and the communication being connected. That's like the big thing in this series about being connected, using sound as communication. So whenever Mafiu sings, it's him expressing himself. Whenever Ueniyama plays on the guitar, it's expression. It's how these characters sing and play their instruments is a form of communication in this series. And it's one of those things where the sound speaks volumes. It speaks more than words, right? When words don't cut it, song and sound does instead. And so it's really interesting. And the bands themselves are akin to relationships. There's talk of, at one point, Haruki going back to his ex-girlfriend's band. You have Ueniyama joining Hiragi's band. You have Mafiu distancing himself from his band. And so there's that symbolism of the bands being akin to relationships, and breaking up and joining new groups is kind of symbolic of these friend circles and relationships kind of breaking apart and reforging, right? Mafiu singing, the characters playing, Ugetsu doing the violin. It's all ways of them bearing their souls to each other, right? And from the very first volume, the idea, leading up to volume 2, the idea of changing the guitar strings, putting the new strings on as a metaphor for plucking the chords of one's heart. I love it. I've loved ever since volume 2 that moment where Ueneyama helps Mafiu change the strings of the guitar right before the concert, and he has that conversation with him. And again, the conversation becomes more natural between Mafiu and Ueneyama when they're talking about music and instruments, because it's something they're both passionate about, and it's a way that they communicate. So I love that metaphor. It's great. And then hair is also a big symbolism in this series. So you have Akihiko. Whenever he has a falling out with Haruki cuts his hair. Haruki's hair being kind of like a symbolism of his unrequited love for Akihiko. And then after he cuts it, it shows that he's like cutting that, fantasized relationship and getting down to what's really happening between him and Akihiko. It's kind of like a Samson and Delilah moment, if you're going to make that analogy. But yeah, so not only the hair, Akihiko and Haruki have lots of symbolism with their relationship, and I've talked about this in the movie reaction, but not only the hair, but the idea of the apartment and the places that they live at. Akihiko and Ugetsu lived in a basement that was cold and kind of soundproof and cut off from everything and dark. And then when he moves in with Haruki, it's like in an apartment, like several floors up, where they can see the fireworks, and it's all open and airy, and it's a totally different environment. The name Akihiko, or the name Haruki's name tying to springtime, where Ugetsu ties to rain and to moonlight, and it's like just the name symbolism. Like, you can look up a whole thing on them, and I'm sure there's been so many tweets and posts about the symbolism with the names and everything. I'm like, I'm not gonna be a broken record and repeat them all, but those are some of my favorites, especially Ugetsu and Haruki, and how each of them form a different relationship with Akihiko. I really love it. But yeah, and then of course, the very heart of this whole matter is the idea of Yuki and Mafiu, and Haragi saying that they were, two halves of the same whole. And when Mafiu loses half of himself, basically, how does he grieve? How does he move forward? What can Ueneyama do to help him move forward with a new relationship? And so that's kind of the heart of the matter with the series, which is interesting, right? I guess if we were to do, I'm looking at colors that are left over, you could do pink. We haven't done pink yet, so Yuki could be pink, or it could be, but here's the thing, I was going to say red, because you can see the red guitar on the cover representing Yuki, and this whole thing with Mafiu, it's all red. Like, it's all red, so that could be like representative of Yuki. And the guitar here is not colored. You only see the top of it. That's black. As far as the instruments themselves, Ugetsu, his use of the violin is representing that he's a soloist. He does like solo performances. He doesn't work with a band. He doesn't work with a group. It's really sad when Mafiu comes to talk to him and Ugetsu bears his soul about his relationship with Akihiko. And Mafiu's like, why are you telling me this? And Ugetsu's like, well, I don't have any friends. And it's like, oh, like that's rough, because he's used to being by himself. But also the violin representing Ugetsu getting mad when Akihiko quits the violin and plays the drums. He feels like Akihiko betrays him. But Akihiko did the drums for a whole different reason when he joined the band with Haruki. I like that our drummers in this series, both Shizu and Akihiko, are kind of like anchors of the group. Akihiko, most of the characters come to him for advice because he seems to have the street smarts, right? Whereas with Shizu, he's kind of the anchor of their group. He kind of kept Haragi and Yuki anchored as well, which is interesting. And then Haruki and Haragi, who are our bassists, they kind of serve as the glue. They can be, you can use the metaphor that they're anchors as well, but I like to think of them as the glue of the band, holding them all together. Like Shizu and Akihiko are like grounding elements, and then Haragi and Haruki are kind of like the glue of the band. They keep everybody together with their personalities, right? And so then I also want to point out Haragi and Shizumi, their band shirts have 3 rectangles. That's their symbolism. It's the 3, which I assume are representing the 3 members, the 3 original members. So Shizu, Haragi, and Yuki. Maybe that's the whole symbolism of having the 3 rectangles, because they're all equal in shape and size. I don't know. Just very interesting. The singers who bear their souls being Haragi and Mafiu for their representative groups. And then as far as Shizu is concerned, Shizu, if you've not read volume 6, or you're not currently up to date with the manga, then this is probably going to be new information for you. But Shizu, we come to find out, there's a lot of symbolic representations of Shizu being like in darkness and being cold. And then Hiragi, I love they use gold to represent the cover for volume 6. Hiragi is dazzling, and he's like a treasure, like a gem or a jewel. And that's how Shizu refers to Hiragi. Like he's a foster child that we come to find out has had kind of like a dark past and a dark childhood. And Hiragi was like the shining light in that. And that's why Shizu like worships the ground he walks on. So I love that metaphor and that symbolism of Hiragi being like dazzling, and Shizu saying that he's not a nice person. That this is the point. By the time you get past volume 6, like the first 5 volumes that are dealing with the movie and the first season of the anime, they're all pretty tame as far as like sexual content goes or anything like that. They're all pretty tame. Obviously, in volume 4, there's the incident with Haruki and Akihiko, which is not tame, and then Ugetsu and Akihiko's relationship is not tame either. But for the most part, it's pretty chaste or pretty censored. But once we get to Shizu, and Shizu is talking about how dazzling Hiragi is, but that he also wants to defile him, it's like, oh, I got a very like Domeki Twittering Birds vibe with Shizu in that moment, that I was like, like Shizu thinks he's not a nice person. He's like, I'm not a good person because I want to do bad things to Hiragi, who is a good person. It's like, oh, buddy. And then once you get, I'm assuming what's going to be in volume 7 of the manga and volume 8, Shizu, which it's consensual, but Shizu does not hold back, and it's like, oh, you're not the quiet type at all. So there's that. As far as other symbolic elements, Mafiu is constantly represented by a puppy. Ueniyama is represented by a cat. So is Hiragi. They're represented by cats as well. Which, if you're going to the whole stereotypical top and bottom relationships, which it's hard because Shizu is also represented by a black cat as well. So Akihiko's represented by a squirrel. Haruki's represented by a man. It has to be a Japanese character that I'm not culturally familiar with. And then Ugetsu is represented by a giant black crow. But I guess if you're going with the trope, then Hiragi is normally a bottom and Shizu is the top. But I want Mafiu to be the top in the relationship with him and Ueniyama, just because it would be something different than what we normally see in Boys Love, especially with Ueniyama, who's typically referred to as the more dominant character. I want Mafiu to be the dominant one in that relationship. But that's just me, right? If we ever get to that point, you know? And then I like the idea of Haruki being the stable, down-to-earth character, and Akihiko is the more fluid, constantly moving character. I like that dynamic. And again, that ties to Haruki being like more earthy, tied to spring, things like that. I like it a lot. So there's just a lot of symbolism with Given. And again, that is scratching the surface. There's so much more that I know we're going to talk about in the comment section, but those are probably my favorite symbolic elements of Given if I had to choose them. I put down here ranking volumes. How do you rank these? It's like ranking episodes. It's hard to rank the volumes. If I had to pick my favorite volumes, it's so hard. I really like volume 5. Here's my thing. If you're going for, I think the best 2 volumes that go together the best are volumes 1 and 2. It's your starter pack. It's your starting volumes. It covers the concert, the first part. They're just great back-to-back volumes. If you want just a nice, solid story start to end, these 2 are great. Absolutely. If you want angst, you get volumes 3 and 4. If you want angst and heartache, you get volumes 3 and 4, right? If you want just like, I probably like volume 2 and volume 5 the best. Volume 5 has the Akihiko confession, and it has, volume 5 is like the redemption story. If you want a redemption story, volume 5 is your volume, because it talks about everything Akihiko does, his rebuilding of his relationship with Haruki. It talks about Ugetsu and their relationship and what happens there. It talks about Mafiu and Ueniyama trying to sort out and talk through their relationship as well. And the confession scene at the end. It's just, if you liked the Given movie, you need to have volume 5 because it's just solid. But honestly, I like that after volume 5, because volume 5 was like the end of an arc. It's like, okay, Akihiko and Haruki are in a relationship now. They've confessed to each other. They're in a relationship. Mafiu and Ueniyama, they're still good. And then it seems like Kizu shifts gears and is like, okay, now we need to talk about Hiragi, and we need to talk about Yuki, and we need to get Ueniyama in on this. So it's like the gears start shifting, and I like Volume 6 a lot for that, and I have a feeling I'm really going to like Volume 7 when it comes out as well. But yeah, how do you rank the volumes? It's like pick your poison, apples and oranges. They're all good. If you get a chance to get any of the volumes of the manga, I highly recommend them. As far as character tiers, I didn't want to do a character tier chart because there's not a lot of characters in Given. There's lots of little side characters, but my top 3 favorite characters are probably Ueniyama, Haruki, and Hiragi. They'd be like my S tier characters. I'd be like Ueniyama and his gay panic. It's amazing. I love it. He's wonderful. He's so relatable. If you've ever like been in a first relationship, the first relationship you've ever been in, Ueniyama is so relatable. It's great. You instantly want to root for his character. You get his frustration with Mafiu, who's not the best at communicating, so you want to root for him. You want to root for him in Mafiu's relationship. It's wonderful. Hiragi is a princess and a brat, and I love him. My birthday buddy. But he's also like so expressive that you instantly connect with him, and you want him and Shizu's relationship to develop, which is why I really like Volume 6 and where the manga goes after that, because I like their pairing a lot. And then Haruki, if I were to relate to any character in this series, it would be Haruki. Haruki and I are like, we are on the same level. Like, I relate to Haruki so much in terms of relationships, in terms of the characters and how you are with your friends. I feel like in my friend circle, I am the Haruki. And so I relate to him so much. I absolutely love it. And then I put Mafiu in S tier. Mafiu, I don't relate to nearly as much, but his character is so nuanced, and his character goes through so many highs and lows, and you get to understand his character and how he struggles with communication. And I think that all of us, in some extent, have been in situations like him where we didn't know what to say or what to do. And so the journey of following Mafiu as he struggles through his grief, especially in the first 2 volumes, is so good that I have to put him up an S tier. Now, my A tier characters I love. They're just not my favorites. Like, Akihiko obviously is A tier. I'll admit, in Volume 4 was testing me. I'm glad that I didn't get Volume 4 and had to wait a long time before Volume 5. Because Volume 4 honestly makes you not like Akihiko. It made me question Akihiko as a character. I was like, oh, I don't know. But then Volume 5 happens. Again, red and blue, total opposites. Volume 5 happened and I was like, okay, Akihiko, I'm going to be like Haruki and give you a second chance. Because we know your perspective now. So, Akihiko's A tier for me. Ugetsu's A tier. Again, Ugetsu's not a bad guy. He's just a troubled character that was just sticking in a relationship that he needed to have been out of a long time ago, right? And I think that ties to what Shizu is telling Mafiu. He's like, if you're not going to commit to Ueniyama and you're just going to be, half-assing this, you need to leave. You need to get out so that relationship does not get to the point where Akihiko and Ugetsu get to, right? So, Shizu, in that vein, he's also A tier for me, and so is Taka-chan. I love Taka-chan. My boy. I love him. Yuki, Iteya, and Ueki are all B tier characters for me. Yuki, we see enough of him. He's a little bit more brooding of a character than I usually like in a series. And I won't speak ill of the dead, but I do like Yuki's character. We just don't see a lot of him. Right? We see him kind of at his lowest points in the series, which doesn't, help you feel good about him as a character all in all. And then Iteya and Ueki, we just don't see them enough yet. And I feel like Kizu is going to give us more of their character, and that may change my mind on their characters as well. And then as far as C tier, nobody's D tier for me in Given, but Kasai, Waka, and Hisokai, their characters, I'm just like, they're there. Ueniyama's sister, I'd put her up in A rank. I like Ueniyama's sister. She's getting more focus in Volume 6, and she's starting to play more of a role than just being Akihiko's unrequited love interest, which I'm glad Kizu is doing. I'm glad Kizu's giving her a role, and I hope that she ends up helping Ueniyama because she's been in a relationship and she's been on the bad side of a relationship when it's ended. So I hope that she's able to give him a lot of advice, like a sister should, because I feel like he needs it. And then my favorite ships, obviously, my favorite ship is probably Ueniyama and Mafiu first. They're my favorite ship. And then Haruki and Akihiko would be my second favorite. And then Hiragi and Shizu would be my third favorite. I definitely root for our main trios as far as relationships go. But Ueniyama and Mafiu, I'm rooting for you, Ueneyama. You're my dude. He's probably my favorite character in the whole series, Ueneyama is. And so these last couple chapters, they've not been good to his character. And I was like, Kizzy, why you throwing me through the ringer? But yeah, so with that being said, as far as season 2 goes in this series, what would season 2 cover? Now, obviously, season 1 is covered through volumes 1, 2, and about half of volume 3. So the anime series covers most of these, like all of volumes 1 and 2 and about half of volume 3. And then half of volume 3, along with volumes 4 and 5, cover the movie and the OVA that are coming out. So we've got that covered. So that just leaves us with volume 6. So if I were to guess, I do think that they'll eventually, Given's gained a lot of popularity in the last 2 years, and so I do think that they're going to make a season 2. The problem is we just don't have enough content to cover the whole series yet. I think that you could get volume 6, volume 7, and then probably, depending on how long it is, volume 8, or at least part of volume 8, would be season 2. So considering that volume 7 has just come out in Japan, I would not be surprised next year in 2022 if they announced that there was going to be a season 2 in production, because once they announce production, then you're looking at probably another 8 months to a year before it comes out. So by that point, Kizzy would probably have plenty of material for them to go off of. So I really want them to make a season 2. Even if they gave us another movie, any given content is good given content, right? But there's so much that this second part of the series is starting to cover. Like the series, it's starting to get spicier. It's starting to delve deeper into these relationships. I feel like with the movie of Akihiko and Haruki's relationship, it was more mature and could deal with more like deep toxic elements and things that are in more mature college relationships. With Haruki and Shizu, these are high school kids. These hormone-filled high school kids. So their relationships are a little more hot and heavy and like matches, like just burning out really quick. So I think you could have more fun with it. And I'm curious to see what Kizzy was going to do. I definitely think that if they have a season 2, every given thing has led in culmination to a song. Like season 1 culminated in Mafiu singing his song at the concert, right? The movie culminated in the band contest, the Battle of the Bands, and Mafiu singing the song then. I think if they do a season 2, it's going to culminate in Hiragi's band debut and Hiragi and Ueneyama singing to Mafiu and kind of like reverse it, right? So that's what I think is going to happen. But I could be wrong. I really want Yuki's song to get played for Mafiu and to see what Mafiu's reaction is. Because I could see Mafiu at first being horrified and not knowing what to say or what to do. But then I think it's going to lead to him and Ueneyama talking about it. And in the end, Mafiu being happy that Ueneyama was able to finally get Yuki's song out there. But I don't know. You know, Mafiu talked about wanting to write a song with Yuki and that not happening. So I don't know. Maybe he'll want to write a song with Ueneyama. Maybe this concert and then finishing Yuki's song will lead Mafiu to wanting to write a song with Ueneyama. And the two of them writing a song and doing what Mafiu could not do with Yuki. That would be beautiful. That would be awesome. I would love that, actually, if him and Ueneyama wrote like a love song together and they got to do what him and Yuki could not. That'd be cool. But yeah, but I don't know. We shall see, right? So I've talked for an hour and it's not nearly enough time to talk about Given. All in all, I highly recommend the manga. If you've not read the manga, you should get it because it's wonderful. Kizu's art style is gorgeous. There's so many beautiful shots of these characters. The storyline from volume 6 on is getting so good. It's one of those series that it keeps on evolving and changing, and I love it. And I can't wait to get volume 7 and then get it in the English version when it comes out. So as far as this channel goes, obviously if there's a season 2, I'm going to react to it. But in the meantime, when the OVA comes out with English subtitles, I pre-ordered the OVA and I have a region-free DVD player, Blu-ray player. I just don't know if it'll have subtitles or not. I don't know if it'll be included with subtitles. If not, then I'm going to wait until a subtitled version comes out. But when it does, I'm going to react to it on my channel so that we can all see it together. So that's exciting. But as far as other Given content goes, there is a stage play that is being that's happening right now. I've heard it's amazing. Some people on Twitter that went and saw it said it's wonderful. It basically covers volumes 1 through 5 as well, only in a stage play. And they say it's great. So when that comes out on Blu-ray, definitely getting that, definitely watching it. We'll definitely have it on Patreon, and hopefully we'll be able to put it on YouTube as well. So lots of Given content to come. I wanted for Thanksgiving and for Thanksgiving for November to do this video and kind of talk about the series that I'm in love with. It's probably my favorite BL series, this and Twittering Birds. I'm just scratching the surface in this hour-long video talking about the series, but it's wonderful. So I hope you enjoyed this reaction. I feel like it was all over the place, but that's just how Given is. It's just wonderful, and you can just talk all day about it. So I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. I can't wait to talk to you all about it. But in the meantime, I do want to share before we leave, my current background on my computer screen is this shot. It's one that Kizu put out there that is of our Given characters 10 years in the future. So you have them in their early to late 20s instead of their late teens to early 20s. So that's my current background right now on my computer. It's a great image. And supposedly with the OVA coming out, there's going to be like a short comic of Haruki and Akihiko meeting each other's families. So fun stuff, right? Shenanigans. So in the meantime, I hope y'all enjoyed this soapbox, and I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. Have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back hopefully in December with more reactions for Given. Bye.